Jason La Canfora, NFL analyst for CBS Sports. Jason, are we believing this? Is Chip Kelly going back to Oregon?
Yeah, he is. And you know, I actually am not terribly surprised by it at all, and have been of the mind that until he tells his team he's leaving and signs with an NFL team, he's not going. And I knew he'd be pursued, and I knew it would come down to Cleveland versus Philadelphia. But there were never any guarantees or assurances that he would get everything he wants. He wants a lot to leave. Some even wonder if in his heart of hearts he really wants to leave. Maybe on a certain level feels like he needs to, but does he really want to? And I can't climb into his mind and you know, pretend I'm Ziggy Freud and figure it out. But if you just followed the signs and talked to the right people close to him, you knew that this was never a slam dunk that he was going. And the idea that he was close to signing with the Browns on whatever it was, like Friday, when he hadn't even talked really, had to sit down with the Eagles yet. He never got close with anyone. I mean, because there were always issues of structure and power and authority and how the front office would be made up and personnel that never got resolved with any of these teams.
Yeah, Tony Dungy told us in the first hour that he spoke to Chip Kelly last night, and though he got the impression Chip was going back to Oregon, he said there was one team that he was strongly considering. What team do you think that was?
Well, at the end, it's the Eagles. But, you know, even then, if this was something that, see, for him to leave school, it's got to be perfect. You know, like, it's got to be, you've got to wow him. He's got to love your personnel structure. You've got to be willing to bring his people in. You've got to run his system. You've got to give him the building, more or less, the way Andy Reid has the Chiefs building. And I don't know that anyone's necessarily totally willing to do that for a guy who's never spent a day in the NFL. But, you know, he's looking for certain assurances. He's used to running a program the way he does, you know, at the university level. And for him to leave what he has there and leave the backing of Phil Knight and leave what's a sure thing and leave an offense that no one's caught up to at the college level yet, to try it at the pros, everything has to be perfect. And neither of these situations was absolutely perfect. Ideally, you'd have a quarterback, too. Neither of these teams necessarily have the quarterback that he'd want. And again, would they be willing to blow out some of their personnel people and bring in people who he wants to work with? All these things all had to match up. And unless they did, he was going to stay put.
Does Chip Kelly's system, would that in theory work at the NFL level?
Well, I guess that's the million-dollar question, or in this case, probably the $8 million a year question. You know, no one really knows. It's an intriguing theory. There's some who I've talked to who felt like by, 8 games in, he'd have to go on to something else because it would be more or less figured out. There's some defensive coordinators I've talked to who are like, bring it on. I want to get some of that. We'll see what he's like here. And there's others who say, you know what, if you follow his career, if you watched him all the way back to Johns Hopkins Division III and then what he did at New Hampshire and to where he is now, he's changed and evolved, and he has a highly evolved offensive mind, and he's able to fit scheme to personnel. So he would not be naive as to think he's going to run exactly what he ran in Oregon, with holding up the signs and all that, and we're just going to be off and running. I mean, I think that's a simplistic view. And I think if these smart people who run these NFL teams thought it was going to be, that was all he was going to do, I don't think they'd be chasing him with as much gusto as they are.
Talking to Jason La Canfora, NFL analyst for CBS Sports. Jason, the Doug Marrone is going to the Buffalo Bills. That leaves 5 jobs still open: the Browns, Bears, Eagles, Cards, and Chargers. Can you give us any insight into who might get those jobs?
Yeah, well, actually, I bet it's 6 before it gets. I bet the number goes up before it goes down because Mike Mularkey in Jacksonville, that move could be coming down. They're getting closer to naming their GM, and when they do, I think Mike Mularkey will be out. A lot of these searches are going to go on for a while. I mean, it's Cleveland and Philly are rebooting. Chicago still has at least 3 to 5 candidates it wants to interview throughout this week. San Diego hasn't even started contacting people for permission to interview them yet. So really, you're kind of looking at Arizona as one that you'd think maybe he's getting close, but even that's a little complicated because Todd Haley hasn't interviewed there yet. They want to talk to Bruce Arians, and he's still in the hospital right now. Jay Gruden's on their wish list. How do I say? A lot of people believe that Bruce Arians would want to be in San Diego or Chicago. I think he gets one of those 2 jobs, and I still believe it ends up being in San Diego. I think Mike McCoy, who interviewed with 4 teams over the weekend, Denver's offensive coordinator, he was the first person Chicago reached out to, and Chicago's going to end up interviewing 15 people. They got more time with McCoy than the other 3 teams that interviewed him. I think that could end up, being a potential fit there. If Jacksonville opens up and Dave Caldwell from the Falcons front office gets that GM job, I think he'd look to bring Greg Roman, the 49ers offensive coordinator, with him as head coach. Who am I missing? Who did I skip?
Well, my question is Jason Garrett safe in Dallas?
For now, that's going to be an interesting situation. We obviously saw a little dust-up last week about whether or not they needed an offensive coordinator, and you talk to some people around the league, and they think that issue may be still simmering. I believe Jerry Jones was away for a few days, maybe going to bowl games or what have you. But he's supposed to be back in the office this week, and we'll see. I mean, certainly I think there's going to be change on the offensive staff, and I expect the Cowboys to pursue North Turner to be their play caller. Could there be undercurrents and ripples that go further than that? Depends who you talk to. I do know if something happens there, Mike Holmgren, as I've been reporting for a long time, has a strong relationship with Jerry Jones. He's obviously worked well with quarterbacks in the past. He's someone who would have his eye on that Dallas job if it opened up, and he could get an interview in San Diego as well, I'm hearing, as well as Jim Mora, UCLA's coach, and obviously Mora's been an NFL head coach himself.
Get you out of here with this, Jason. Of the 4 teams that won on Wild Card Weekend, which team has the best chance to pull the upset next weekend?
I've been riding Seattle all year. I thought they'd win that division. I really like that team. Losing Chris Clemens, it looks like that's going to be a torn ACL, and he's out for the year. That hurts, but I like them on that fast track. I like them in that dome. I even like them as a road team now. So I think Seattle's a team you really have to fear.
Thank you, Jason.
You got it.
That's Jason Canfora, NFL analyst for CBS Sports.